The oldest Old Testament manuscript that we had dated right around AD 1000. So we're about 1,000 years removed from that. With the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and I want to show you where they were discovered. You guys will put that next slide up. With the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, this is the cave where the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. I want to read you this story and then we're going to move on. But this is just a fascinating story as far as how God providentially allowed practically the greatest discovery of modern biblical history. The story of this discovery is one of the most fascinating tales of modern times. In February or March of 1947, a Bedouin shepherd boy named Muhammad was searching for a lost goat. He tossed a stone into a hole in a cliff on the west side of the Dead Sea, about 8 miles south of Jericho. To his surprise, he heard the sound of a shattering pot. Investigating, he discovered an amazing sight. On the floor of the cave were several large jars containing leather scrolls, wrapped in linen cloth. Because the jars were carefully sealed, the scrolls had been preserved in excellent condition for nearly 1,900 years. They were evidently placed there in about AD 68. 5 of the scrolls found in Dead Sea Cave 1, which you can see on the left, as it is now called, were bought by the Archbishop of the Syrian Orthodox Monastery at Jerusalem. Meanwhile, 3 other scrolls were purchased by Professor Suknik of the Hebrew University there. When the scrolls were first discovered, no publicity was given to them. In November of 1947, 2 days after Professor Suknik purchased 3 scrolls and 2 jars from the cave, he wrote in his diary, "It may be that this is one of the greatest finds ever made in Palestine, a find we never so much as hoped for." But these insignificant words were not published at the time. Fortunately, in February of 1948, the Archbishop, who could not read Hebrew, phoned the American School of Oriental Research in Jerusalem and told about the scrolls. By good providence, the acting director of the school at the moment was a young scholar named John Trevor, who was also an excellent amateur photographer. With arduous, dedicated labor, he photographed each column of the great Isaiah scroll, which is 24 feet long and 10 inches high. He developed the plates himself and sent a few prints by airmail to Dr. W.F. Albright at Johns Hopkins University, who is widely recognized as the Dean of the American Biblical Archaeologists. By return airmail, Albright wrote, "My heartiest congratulations on the greatest manuscript discovery of modern times. What an absolutely incredible find. And there can happily not be the slightest doubt in the world about the genuineness of the manuscript." I want to show you, this is the great Isaiah scroll. This is one of the scrolls that was found in Cave 1. And you might say, what's the big deal? We're just looking at a picture. Well, this is actually a high-resolution copy of the actual scroll. Because of the technology we have, and because of the kindness and generosity of Google, Google actually partnered with the Israel Museum, and they've made it possible for everyone in the world to see the actual great Isaiah scroll. This scroll you're looking at right now, you're resting your eyes on an Old Testament scroll that's been dated at 125 BC. It's incredible. It's incredible evidence. I'm privileged to actually be standing in the same room, and even though I don't worship this photo, I worship the God who is represented in the words of this manuscript. Incredible. This discovery basically closed about a 1,000-year gap. And as they examined this manuscript, they found that there was a 95% word-for-word accuracy. And then the other 5% variation consists mostly of slips of the pen and slight misspellings. And I thought this was interesting as I was studying today for chapel. I thought, just as this scroll owes its existence on the internet to high-resolution photography, so also this technology of high-resolution photography and even the internet owes its existence to the tradition, I would say, of thousands of years of high-resolution copies. For the scroll itself, if you've got scribes that are that meticulous that they're not even going to copy a yod without looking at the text, I would argue is a high-resolution copy. So this is the, I would say, tradition, technology, the original archaic technology by which we have modern technology of copying with photographs. That is manuscript evidence. Now I want to share with you a few men, and we're going to roll a little bit faster here. I want to share with you a Roman historian by the name of Tacitus. And there are a lot of different examples that I could give. If you guys would roll to that next slide, please. I got scribes on the brain. When you think about the number of historians that we have access to from the first century, I think of Suetonius, a Roman historian, Pliny the Younger, who was a Roman official, Tacitus, Cornelius Tacitus, who is recognized as an authority as a Roman historian. This is what he writes concerning the Great Fire for which Nero was blamed. Consequently, to get rid of the report, Nero fastened the guilt and inflicted the most exquisite tortures on a class hated for their abominations, called Christians, by the populace. Christus, from whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilate. This is what Dr. Habermas, our own famous scholar over at Liberty University, has to say. We should realize that it is quite extraordinary that we could provide a broad outline of most of the major facts of Jesus' life from secular history alone. So if we didn't have a Bible, just by the references in secular history, we could reconstruct the major events in the life of Christ. So that was one historian among many. And again, I'm just giving you a sampling. I'm giving you, I would say, an archaeological appetizer. Let's move on to church history as far as the church fathers were concerned. Ignatius was bishop of Antioch, and he lived from AD 70 to 110. He knew all of the apostles. He was a disciple of Polycarp, who was a disciple of the apostle John. Ignatius is believed to be the first martyr in a Roman Colosseum, and he died by being fed to lions. And what's so incredible is, as he traveled from Antioch, which is just north of Jerusalem, to his execution in Rome, there were a few things that were written, but as I've studied the life of Ignatius, two quotes that really stood out to me. He says, "I would rather die for Christ than rule the whole earth." And then he says this, "I am God's wheat, ground fine by the lion's teeth, to be made purest bread for Christ." Young people, do you realize that we stand in a tradition based on evidence of men and women who knew the apostles? My children, we have this saying in our home, and there are times when my kids will get frustrated with me and they'll say, "Never mind," and I'll say, "I never will." And then Abigail, my 8-year-old, will sometimes say, "Dad, that doesn't even make any sense." Well, let me tell you something that doesn't make any sense. It makes no sense to me that these men would be so meticulous about accurately recording facts about people, places, and things, and then get the miracles of the apostles wrong, and even be willing to be thrown into a Colosseum to be annihilated by lions. I cannot even imagine what that was like, but it gets worse. Another church father by the name of Polycarp. He was martyred at 86 years of age. Coach talked the other day in our faculty devotions about passion. How would you like to have an 86-year-old that was convicted? He had such convictions that he stood and looked his executors in the eye, and he was willing to take whatever they had to throw at him. About 155 in the reign of Antonius Pius, when a local persecution was taking place in Smyrna. Smyrna is just north of Ephesus, and several of his members had been martyred. He was singled out as the leader of the church and marked for martyrdom. When asked to recant and live, he is reputed to have said, 86 years have I served him, and he had done me no wrong. How can I speak evil of my king who saved me?" He was burned at the stake. And as he was burning, they pierced his heart with a sword. You want to talk about persecution? Nero was so creative with persecution of the saints that history records that he would have twilight executions. And to light the Colosseum, he would crucify Christians alive and then burn them so that they would act as torches in order to light the Colosseum.